Welcome to the Equine Vet Connect Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. I'm a veterinarian and a farrier. The goal of this podcast is to educate horse people, break things down, bust myths, and keep it real. Speaking of breaking things down, here's my legal disclaimer to keep my attorney and insurance company happy. While I am a vet, I may not be your vet. Contact them before trying anything you hear on this podcast. Remember, just because you watched it on YouTube or heard it on a podcast does not mean you can do it. Please use common sense. Welcome back to the Equine Vet Connect Podcast. I'm Dan Carter. We're here in the old studio, old treatment room 1. I've got Kyle Schmidt with me today. He's a local farrier in the area. Somebody I've actually known for a really long time. Yeah. We're not going to go into that because it'll show my age. But
well, man.
So Kyle, welcome, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Happy to be here.
Oh, man, we're glad to have you. So, Kyle, you've been a farrier. It's kind of in your blood, though, because that kind of tell us your story, how you ended up here.
Okay. I'm a second generation farrier.
Right.
So I guess my dad shod for, I don't know, probably 35 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of grew up in it. You know, I started working on horses when I was 12, something like that. Started pulling and clinching for them, and kind of history since then. So it's been fun. I still enjoy it too.
It's a great career. I absolutely love it. So, when you were getting your start, did you go to school or did you apprentice? How did you get to where you're at?
No, I just rode with my dad, and
Right.
a lot of guys like you, and I can name 15 other guys around here that all helped me, but just had a lot of experience with him. He shot a ton of horses, and so I had a lot of experience with him, and luckily, he had a lot of clients that let me get underneath horses and do a lot with them. So but and like Dad was good about getting me in the truck with other guys too. So I learned from tons of people. So very, very thankful.
You came up under a good man. When I first moved to Georgia as a farrier, your dad was actually president of the GPFA, and I can tell you he put in a lot of hours and a lot of work to really expand the profession, and he did know a lot of the right guys and could get you with them. And I came up a similar way, right? I came up as an apprentice. I guess you would say no formal training, like we didn't go to school, but I think there's nothing wrong with shoeing school, but I do think apprenticing under someone and then going and working with other people, I think that's really. I think if you go to school, I think you get out and you've got the basics, so you can start to learn. But I think it's those apprenticeships that I think that's what makes farriers.
Yeah.
I don't think you can learn it in a few weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I think that and saying it from somebody like I didn't go to school, but I think most people that I've met that have come out of school are kind of more ready to get in the truck with somebody.
Right.
Get in the truck and start learning the ins and outs of the actual farrier world. And so it gets them a good base to start with.
I think that's how I've always viewed it. You get a base, and then you're kind of. I remember when I landed after my when I got my pilot's license. I remember landing, and the examiner looks over at me. Congratulations, you have a license to go learn.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where we're shoeing school.
Which is terrifying. Your license to learn flying a plane.
I had almost 60 hours of training when they gave me that license.
Really?
I mean, I felt pretty good.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
So, 60 hours of flying time.
Yeah.
But
still a lot.
So let's dive into this. Like, I'm pretty excited. You're the second guest we've had on the podcast. And this is a topic. I mean, obviously, I love being a farrier. I love shoeing horses. It's one of my favorite things. Even though I'm a vet now, I still love shoeing horses. That was my first love.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into some shoeing, and let's some different. I kind of want to talk about philosophies here and how you shoe horses every day, what you're doing to help these athletes perform at their best. So, if you're going to talk about like what your goals are as a farrier and what you try to accomplish every time you pick up that foot, let's kind of start going down that road. What do you look at? What's important to you when you're in this job?
Okay. I think first and foremost is this might be a little controversial, but depth. I think, I kind of live by that do no harm first off. I think in my world, like I'm just trying to help help the horse do its job better. Stay sound, perform as well as it can. And I think first off, vertical depth is your first thing. You've got to protect P3, and that comes to me at like pretty much all costs. Like that's number one.
So when you say vertical depth, what we throw that term around a lot, but let's talk about what is vertical depth.
Okay. I mean, people would call it like sole depth, I would guess. But people do get it confused with toe length versus vertical depth, and that's very different. But what I would call vertical depth in a hole would be measured if you would measure from like directly straight from the coronary band straight down to the ground.
Right.
Right around center of rotation. And so I think that would be my idea of vertical depth. And it's crucial. I mean, if horse doesn't have a healthy coffin bone, they're not going to be able to get around very well.
One of the things I like to tell people, and this is what I've come to after 20-something years of shoeing horses, there's nothing magic about the equine foot. It exists to protect the coffin bone from planet Earth.
Yep. That's really its only job.
And our whole goal is to keep as much in between that bone and planet Earth as possible. That's how they stay sound.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and that's how they stay healthy too. Like in my experience, if you find the bottom of a foot or you trim a foot very short, you're gonna pay for that for a while.
Right.
That horse is gonna, even if it's not lame necessarily, like the growth is gonna slow down. It's not just not gonna be a healthy foot. And so it's kind of amazing that people, and as soon as you say, okay, I'm going to leave a little length on a foot, or a little bit of depth, and people seem to think, oh, it's toe, it's too much toe length, and it's not that at all. We're talking about minimal amounts. And then even if it is a little long, that foot's going to come around a lot faster, what you want. It's going to have more growth. The horse is going to be happy and sounder, and probably going to have a lot less problems down the road.
I think one way to simplify it is making the foot taller.
Right.
Not necessarily
Right.
longer.
Exactly.
Just making the foot taller.
Exactly.
And we're talking, I think the studies talk about they want a centimeter of sole depth under some of these thoroughbreds. The station thoroughbreds said centimeter of sole depth. I'm shooting for more than that.
Yeah. I think that's like a minimal for what I would want on, especially some of these thoroughbreds now, because they're getting so big. And, I mean, we have one that's massive, and it's a lot of weight down on the foot.
I mean, I'm shooting, and I'm terrible with metrics. I want a minimum like half inch of sole, half to 3/4 of an inch of sole. That's where I'm happy. Like, cause I've got distance between that bone and planet Earth. I've got protection. I got room for mistakes to happen.
Yes.
We can find a rock, and it's not the end of the world.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. They're not going to get a stone bruise or anything from walking across gravel one time.
And it's interesting you brought up the point about when you get these horses short, growth will slow down, and I've seen that a lot.
Oh yeah.
Like when you get these horses that we use the term they're bottomed out, where the sole's been trimmed or the sole's been worn down to where you don't have a lot of depth, and we do a lot of venograms. I've done a lot of venograms over the years where we're able to inject the contrast dye into the vessels of the foot, take an X-ray of that, and we can see all the vascular supply inside that foot. One of the things that amazes me is how much vascular supply there is underneath that coffin bone that's feeding that sole.
Yeah.
And it sort of makes sense what you're saying. If you bottom that foot out, if you get that foot short, you're compressing that vascular supply, and the sole's not able to grow because you've compressed those blood vessels. You're not getting adequate circulation into that foot. You're not able to grow, and it seems like it takes forever once you get one that's bottomed out.
Oh, yeah.
So sort of what's your approach when you're dealing with those feet that are too short, either from they've been barefoot and worn their foot down, or they've been over trimmed? What's kind of your approach to get those horses back growing again?
I mean, it obviously, as we always say, like every horse is different. But I really like leather pads. I think that it's pretty simple and just some sort of nice soft packing underneath it. But and a lot of times that's a few cycles in that, and they end up coming back out of them and being good. But just trying to get more depth on them, get some protection on them. Because that's really the only way you're going to get out of that hole.
And one of the things that I often tell people is you cannot trim one into depth.
No, you can't trim a good foot into one.
So if you're missing that depth, put your hoof knife down.
Yeah, leave it in your pocket.
Yes. wire brush that foot.
Yeah.
And and so when you're doing that, a lot of times we'll see these horses that are really short. I mean, I think one of the things that was taught to me early on is you're not paid for what you take off the foot. You're paid for what you leave.
Yes. I love
So
that saying.
a lot of times, I've been out and watched you. A lot of times I see you pulling shoes off. You're just dressing this foot up and nailing them back up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, and you pull the shoe off and there's just not much depth there. And the foot's just maybe migrated forward a little bit, and you really just need to get the heels back where they're solid and get it dressed back. And usually you'll come back to a lot better foot. And so, or maybe a few cycles and then you've got tons of depth to work with.
So when you're talking about that, you made the statement just saying bringing those heels back to where they should be. When you're looking at that foot, where are you looking at? Like, 'cause we hear a lot about heel, like we try to leave these heels long, and I disagree with that. I think we want to put them adequate, but what's sort of your marker? Where are you trying to get those heels trimmed to?
Usually the what we call like the widest and widest point of the frog. You want it back where the widest and the weight bearing point of the frog is. I try and like the best way I've explained it to clients about it, because we've all heard like don't touch the heels or leave the heels, and what I explain to people is I'm like, if you take your tennis shoes on and you don't put the back of it behind your heel, you just let that crush down like you're going to take the garbage out or something, and how your heels are kind of sitting back there off the back of it. Now imagine a horse has got to perform like that, because those heels, instead of just being what they say is leave the heels, you're leaving a heel that's migrated forward.
Right.
And that ends up just crushing the whole hoof back there. And so that's what I try and explain to people. And then a wise man said that they don't get to take their shoes off at night.
Yes.
So they've got to live with those crushed heels for however long they have them. And so it makes it where people understand it a little bit more.
I think that's an important thing to think about. As farriers, you're exactly right. We go out, we trim these horses, we shoe them. They got to stand in that shoe for 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, at least sometimes.
If it's ill-fitting, they're in it.
Yeah,
and they're standing 23 hours out of the day a lot of times.
Yeah, yep. And working and everything else.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And that's the other thing I think about when you're talking about that heel length, and those are really high heels. I think about my wife, if she's wearing heels somewhere, the first thing she wants to do is get those heels off.
Oh, yeah.
And yet we're trying to stack this stuff on. It's like, what are we doing? Like,
yeah.
And I think if I had to, we throw the term, and we're going to get into this more. I think what we're talking about here is the term that gets thrown around a lot. We want to balance the foot.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about balance, I try to remind people balance is a happy median. Balance is not an extreme. There's no extremes when we're talking balance. And I think that's important. We don't want to take too much heel, but at the same time, we don't want to leave too much.
Right.
I think it's that whole Goldilocks thing. You want it just right.
Yeah,
I think
you need that middle ground there.
Right. Mm-hmm. I think finding that, especially when we're talking about heel length, because again, like you talked about, you can have these long heels and they crush and migrate forward.
And then it's a whole lot harder to get back after it's bad than it is to prevent it from being bad.
I agree.
And and it's amazing. Like if you consistently are trimming heels back and you're trimming that foot nice and leaving it nice, then usually that gets less and less, and you end up having a nice foot. You don't have to bring the heels back so far. It's not running forward near as much. It's a lot healthier of a hoof capsule.
It gives you that base of support under the leg. And I agree with you. I think it does start with the heels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's big function back there.
So, and we often talk about that, about when we're looking at a foot. I always say you start shoeing the horse before you ever pick up the foot.
Right.
And that's one of the things I've watched you over the years. I watch you when you go up to start a horse. I see you always looking at the horse. What are some of the things that you're looking for when you're walking up to that foot for the first time? What are some of the things you're looking at?
Posture was a big one.
Okay.
Watch how they're standing, and obvious things, if they're sitting and they're pointing any foot or they're resting a foot consistently. Then I'm looking at their shoulders, looking at how they're built, their conformation, and then obviously hoof balance and seeing what it looks like, seeing if they're their feet are underneath their limb, or if they're happy with them, if they're not. That's all just before you get underneath them. But just looking at the whole horse and seeing if there's anything that yells at me and says, ow, or something's going
Right.
on, and I like to watch them go too if we can, because that's, these the horses that we're working on most of the time are, they're performing a lot and they're getting rode a lot, and that's when you want to see them go, and you can make some changes from seeing that. But I just try and keep the whole horse in mind. It's got kind of a term that gets thrown around a little bit, but it really does matter for all of it.
So yeah, I think that was a very important statement you made. Watching these horses go and watching how they work, because we don't shoe them to stand in cross ties.
Right.
We shoe them so they can go perform and they can be an athlete. So I agree 100%. I think knowing what the horse's job is and what they need to do, I think that's important.
Oh yeah, and in their history, I think the history, as long as you have people that have a good idea of what's going on, but like their history, at least recent history, because I mean, that you can take that into consideration too, just depending on what they've been doing.
Right. So we get into, you've looked at this foot, and then we look at the foot from, how the horse is standing, we look at it resting on the ground, we look at how they're standing, and then you're going to pick the foot up, and now it's time to go to work. What's the first thing you do? You pick this foot up, what's the first thing you want to do?
I mean, I'm just going to look over the whole thing.
Right.
Look at it, see if anything yells out at me. And then probably going to trim the frog.
Trim the frog.
And, get it where it needs to be. And then you can kind of base everything else off of that.
One of the important things that we learn as farriers, and I think sometimes we forget, is the frog is the only structure on that foot that doesn't move.
Right.
It's always there, and it's always where it's supposed to be.
Yep.
And trimming the frog first, because when you made that statement about the highest, widest part of the frog, the highest, widest part of a properly trimmed frog.
Properly trimmed frog, correct, yeah. Makes a big difference.
Yes. And everything bases around that.
Right.
So whatever your frog is, that's the one static structure you've got. So once you've got it, then we can kind of move into the rest of that.
Oh, yeah.
That trim. So you've got your frog prep, because again, that's going to be your landmark for everything.
Yeah.
What's sort of your next step? What things are you looking at from there? What things you're doing next?
Looking at the proportions of around that frog. I'm going to look at, what we would do is call it like mapping the foot.
Right.
And that helps out a lot too. You can kind of see if that hoof has any issues going on with it, as in if it's out of balance with that, because it gives you lines you can look at.
Okay.
And kind of base that off of, not necessarily where it needs to be trimmed, but you can get an idea of what's going on with it or how you need to shoe it based on that to get everything balanced and underneath their limb.
So when you're talking about mapping that foot, you get the frog trim, and we often talk about finding that center of the foot. Been described as Duckett's dot, right?
Yep.
Finding the termination of the bars where they grow up into the sole, and then finding that Duckett's dot point, and everything kind of centers around that.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, going back to the frog, that's where we're going to locate that.
Yep.
Once we find that center of articulation, center of mass, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be our center. We're going to sculpt everything around it.
Yep. Oh yeah, for sure.
So what things are you doing to locate that point?
I mean, again, trimming your frog properly, trimming the bars properly. And then you can usually, at least in my experience, I think Duckett's dot's about 3/8 of an inch or so back from the apex of the frog.
Right.
And then you can physically draw lines on the foot. You can get your brass ruler out and draw a line like horizontally across the foot, and then you can draw one vertically. And then you can have little like quadrants, and you can have a balance, because you want a good ratio front to back. Like you want to have, if you could have 50-50, obviously that'd be ideal. But you get it as best you can, and then you shoe it for what it's not. And try and, get it to where it should be with the shoe if you can't do it with a trim.
Right. So when you talk about those quadrants, we divided that up. And we talk about those quadrants. This is where probably the most important part of the trim is, and that's shaping that foot.
Yeah.
So kind of describe, once you've got those quadrants, what you're doing next on that foot.
I mean, you're going to, aside from pulling depth off, but you're going to try and get even quadrants even with the hoof wall. Nice hoof wall thickness if you can. Trying to get that all even. And then again, like if that's not possible, you're going to add a shoe and try and get it accomplished that way. But you want to have, even quadrants if you can, but most of it, I'm just gathering it up is what we call it, but you're just dressing the walls down and trying to get that all together. If that makes sense.
It does. So, you've gone in, you found that, you built those quadrants, and drawing lines, I can remember, and I still do this day. I mean, thousands of feet later,
Oh, yeah.
if I get one that's a little distorted, I'll still grab a Sharpie. I
Oh,
go
yeah.
in, trim my frog, find Duckett's dot, find the bridge, locate the widest part of my foot where it should be, draw that other line down horizontal, and I start building those radiuses into my
That's a good way to
foot,
say it. Yeah.
and building, and it should be an equal radius all the way around.
Right.
Like the front radius should match the back radius.
Right.
And,
Right.
and if you're trimming feet properly, that's going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You'll get those proportions right. And you, especially on a foot that you haven't been working on, it might be tough to accomplish at first, but then it will end up coming there. And that's still it. And on that one, I think getting those heels back where they're supposed to be is crucial. And
Right.
I think that plays a big part in it.
I'll tell you, I think one of the biggest changing points in my career was I spent a lot of time at farrier clinics, and what you hear constantly is the foot should mirror the coffin bone. And I remember I was in vet school at the time, and we were looking at a lot of x-rays of these feet. And I remember coming to the conclusion, coffin bones are pretty symmetric, and they're not ugly.
Yep. Yep.
And I started thinking, wait a minute, I've got a lot of ugly feet.
Yep.
And that was a realization I had, is if there's not ugly coffin bones, why do I have ugly feet?
Oh, yeah.
And I realized that I needed to work on what I was doing.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a gut check moment, because that time, I mean, I'm in vet school, I'm a journeyman farrier,
Yeah.
and I just came to the realization that I don't quite understand what it is I'm doing.
I think, man, those are some of the best moments to have. And I've obviously had some of those too over the years, as you've seen. And so it's been game changers when you start noticing stuff. And it's wild when you start trying to do that and stop trying to make it what you want it to be. It ends up being a lot better deal for you.
Because it's interesting looking at those and all of a sudden realizing those radiuses are the same going around this foot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there is a true widest part of the foot, and there is a radius that follows that foot.
Oh, yeah.
And it's I call it working with nature, not against
Not
it.
against it, right. Yeah.
And I think once you learn to map those feet, you learn to understand what those radiuses are supposed to do. I think it's a big change.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's crucial to get a healthy hoof is doing that, because it's, again, like you were talking about with blood flow, like that all gets altered and messed up too if all those radiuses are out of whack, or your quadrants are out of whack. It plays a role on that too.
It's going to change the pressure that's on the coronary band.
Oh, yeah, big time.
If you don't have that foot shaped like it should, you're going to have increased or decreased pressure on the coronary band, and it's going to change how that blood flow is circulating through the coronary band, which is going to change your foot growth.
Right. And then it's kind of that like revolving deal where it changes your foot growth, then the horse's posture is going to change, and then it's just going to continue on getting worse and worse and worse. And so it kind of can get in a hole pretty quick that way.
I think one of the coolest things is once that foot's grown down, we can't really affect it as much. But I think one of the coolest things is when you get that foot truly balanced, like you've mapped that foot, you get those radiuses built into the wall like you should. You're starting to build that vertical depth. And all of a sudden you come out 4 to 5 weeks later and you look and you've pushed, like, I mean, I've seen as much as a half inch of growth out of the coronary band. Like there's a line there and you've got this growth coming out and you're like, oh, wow.
I love seeing it. I love it. It's like it's that, like, like it just tells you you're doing it right. You're making progress,
Yep.
And you can look at that and usually see, like, if I'll get down on the concrete half the time and be like laid out looking at these things, but you can look at it and see, and it's just looks perfect where it's going to be. And you get to watch it grow down and end up having this nice foot.
It's so cool. I think, when you I always say when you shoe that horse, it's when you come back next time you find out what kind of job you did.
Oh, yeah.
And if you come back and all of a sudden this foot is really growing,
Yeah.
that's a win.
Yep. Oh,
That's
yeah.
a win.
Yep. You're doing good. So,
And I think that's, I love a shoeing contest. And Craig Turnka said one time, we ought to judge a shoeing contest 4 weeks later.
yeah, for real.
That's when we ought to judge one.
Oh, yeah.
Because that says, all right, did we get this right or not? And I think that's the true markers when you've got things balanced up and all of a sudden you're getting that depth in the foot and this hoof wall's growing. and you're making these big nipper passes because you've got so much growth. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it feels good. You know, 'cause, and that's usually, I mean, most of the time is accompanied by a sounder horse.
Right.
You know, and so you're getting that too. You know, you hear the trainer's like, man, he's moving so good. He's doing so much better. And then 4 weeks later, you're burying your nippers in him and you're like, man, this is great. Like, you know, and it was all just because you took the time to get everything right and left a little depth on him too.
Yes, I remember there's a famous trainer around here for years, and I remember Sonny one time said, you know what kind of horse wins the hack? A sound one.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. She had some good sayings.
yes, that was one of the wisest things I ever heard. And you know, you think about, you know, we talk about, people are always worried about something being long. Well, you can leave one long and they'll be sound.
Yeah.
You cut one a millimeter short and they limp.
Yep.
Not going to win the hack.
No,
They're
no,
limping,
no.
not going to win the hack. Not getting good scores. The bell's going to get rung.
Yep,
I mean, it's just
exactly.
not a good scenario.
Oh, yeah.
So, like I said, anything we can do to encourage that foot to grow,
Yes.
I think that's
Yeah, because you know that it's rejuvenating itself. It's so, you know, if it does, you know, something does happen with it or anything, you've got more, you know, you've got foot coming in to work with, you know, and you've got stuff that you can help that horse with one way or another.
right.
So I just don't see any other way that it works better than you know, at least facing it from that angle. So
And the other thing I often think about too is, you know, when you've got that good growth, it allows you so many more options.
yeah,
Because if you're fighting to get a foot to grow, if you need to do something to change that foot, if you don't have growth, you can't.
yeah,
You can't do it.
yeah,
And so when you've got a foot that's growing really well, and I look back at my career and I can remember I shot everything at 6 weeks. Everything I was shooting was at 6 weeks. And then I learned to shoe horses. I learned how to build depth. I learned how to properly dress the foot.
cycles got shorter.
It got real short. We couldn't go 6 weeks anymore. 6 weeks is gone.
Yeah, I don't, man, and it's probably around the same time as like when I started getting that idea of depth, and I don't have anything that goes 6 weeks.
No.
You know, I mean, it's 4, maybe 5.
Right.
So but they grow foot, and so, and that's a good problem, you know, because I mean, in my mind too, if they're growing that much foot, then you're doing a good job. They're healthy. They're probably getting rode more, so the horse is probably feeling better. So everything just works out better that way.
No, it was a big game changer, and I realized I understood I was on the right path when I was coming back at 6 weeks and going, we need to back this
Yeah.
up. We need to be at like 5 weeks. All of a sudden, 5 weeks, no, we need to be closer to 4.
Oh,
And I'm taking the same amount of foot off in 4 weeks as I was at 6.
We're at 6. Oh yeah.
That's a win.
Oh yeah.
That's a win all day because we got something we can work with then. That's a
for
healthy
sure.
foot. The foot is growing. That's what we want it to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, unfortunately, if you got a good farrier, your shoeing intervals are going to get
Yeah.
more
yeah,
frequent.
It would cost you a little bit more, but you're going to save money on, hopefully save money on injections and everything else too, you know.
I tell people this all the time. Good farriers are bad for my business.
Yep.
But that's what we want though. Like and that's a big focus of mine is like I try to prevent things.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in, I feel like if you're just constantly fixing, you're in catch up mode.
Right.
But if you're working to prevent, the horses are happier. The owners are happier, the trainers are happy. We can go be athletes and do what we want to do. So that's our whole goal, is to produce a sound horse. Good farriers, big role in that. Not just from the standpoint of they're not footsore, but if that limb's properly balanced, they're moving like they should, our risk of injury goes way down.
Yes. Yeah.
Way down.
Yeah. I agree. I think that and I don't have any studies to prove it in my own business, but the ones that have the nice feet or, nice, good feet consistently are the ones that you don't see near as often.
I agree.
So, and the ones that, you have trouble with, or the ones that you're having trouble with balance, you're coming out and injecting their coffin joints all the time, and so, or they're having other issues and injuries. And so it's crucial. I go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think too is if they're not loading that foot properly, if that foot's not balanced where they're not loading through the center of that foot, they're not loading that foot properly, and they're leaning one way or the other, this increases our risk, in my opinion, of soft tissue injuries.
Yeah.
Like an injection's one thing. If we got to maintain a little synovitis in a joint, that's an easy fix. You start getting into collateral ligament injuries,
That's what I was thinking.
suspensory branch injuries, where we're not loading properly, that's an issue. And a lot of times we hear a lot about protecting the deep flexor tendon, and there's a lot of these different shoeing techniques that are supposed to take strain off the deep flexor tendon.
It's just the fancy thing they want to talk about.
Yeah, looking in my practice, I see very few deep flexor injuries. What I do see a lot of are suspensories, which are load-bearing injuries. I
Yes.
see collateral ligament injuries, and I think a lot of those I think we can minimize a lot of that through proper foot balance because we're going to land even. We're not going to be, if you're sore on the inside of that foot or the medial side of that foot, you're going to land heavier to the outside.
Right.
And if you're landing heavier to that outside, that's going to change how we load through there, and something's going to get overloaded.
Right.
So, again, I don't want to say it's all about the foot, but
Starts there.
I'd say it starts there.
Yeah, that's that saying of no foot, no hoof, no horse, no foot, no horse. It's true,
Right.
And in a lot of ways. And then, like you said there too, I think, balance is obviously defined in different ways for different people. But I think you hit it there. Like I think landing flat is a big one. And we achieve that however we can. But I think otherwise soft tissue stuff suffers.
Well said. Well said. And that kind of leads me to back feet. I feel like front feet get everybody wants to look at front feet. Everybody's always judging the front feet.
Yeah.
Back feet. This is something that me and you've discussed a lot. And you kind of share the same passion I do for shoeing the hind feet on these horses. How critical do you think it is to have those hind feet where they should be?
Very, very. I think, a horse needs purchase. They've got to have grip back there. And there's obviously the controversy of breakover and all that, but they need grip. They especially need some sort of toe back there, as in like a radius. They need to be able to grab the ground and propel themselves forward. And I think people they don't think about it like that. They treat them like their back feet, and you see a lot of like setback toes and nubbed off, feet and usually that's accompanied by a horse that's sore.
Right.
And I think it's crucial. They've got to have, and depth back there is important too. Like, people think that it's not as much of a load bearing back there weight wise, but they still need depth, and
When you bring that up about backing up hind feet, we've seen this before. Like, you see these horses have had their toes backed up behind, and they're standing really heavy on their heels, and these horses are camped under. And you talk about purchase, which is that toe getting into the ground. When we lack that toe because it's been backed up and they're standing heavy on the heel of that foot on the hinds, these horses get camped under.
Yep.
And that's one of the things, like, when you're looking at a horse for the first time, I know we've talked about this a lot when we're going around a horse that comes into a barn, and you see those toes that are backed up behind. They lack that purchase. They lack that toe can't get into the ground, and they get very camped under with their back legs.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And especially watching them move, you can see it, and that's like, you pointed out to me too, is like they'll kind of throw those rooster tails up behind them some, and you'll see them, and they'll really look kind of pogo-y in the back, and it's amazing. Like, you give them some purchase back there, and it's a game changer, and it helps the front end too. And
Oh, yeah.
and especially like, it's nice when you have a good trainer that has good feel and rides, and you change that just even immediately, even if it's awesome, because you can really see it, and then you hear about it.
Oh, that front end is the dumb end. I always like to say, like, it just needs to get up and out of the way.
Yeah, it just needs to like tap the ground and do some steering kind of stuff, but like
Go look
behind
pretty.
is the engine.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And you talked about that, throwing those rooster tails and being able to grab the ground and propel themselves forward. When you're missing that hind toe, because if you look at those hind coffin bones, you look at most hind feet shapes, it's like a round pointed shovel. It's
Right.
kind of diamondy. And I think that is so they can get into the ground and really push and drive.
I agree. It's just I think it's almost black and white to me. Like, it's just so you can tell the difference so much in them. And I agree. I think that, especially in the difference, and I mean, front coffin bones to me are still way more triangular than I think a lot of people think they are.
Right.
The hinds especially, I agree. And, we want that hoof to mimic the coffin bone. So I think it's crucial.
And what are some things you can do? Like, even if you've got the purchase where it needs to be, you've got things right behind, but there's still, some of these horses are just so strong on their hindquarters. They're still slipping through there. If you're getting that report from somebody like, hey, I still feel like they're slipping, they're having to pull with that front end, what are some of the things you start thinking about doing?
Concave.
Concave.
Yeah, concave.
I love concave.
I'm gonna build them some concave hinds, and it's a big, and I get some people think it's just too much purchase and stuff, but in my experience, it most of the time is. And I think footing obviously plays a big part, and we're at least knowledgeable about what venues that these guys go to and what their footing's like. And so if it is super sticky, then we would need to change it. But even in some of that, like the newer footing, like up at Tryon and stuff, I'll leave the concave on them and I'll just like roll the toe.
Right.
And see, and just kind of maybe take a little bit back or like take the toe back, but still let them have the grip. And I haven't seen an increase in the amount of, maintenance they need in the hind end from having concave on. And I don't think you have, I don't think you have either, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So, I understand the thought process of it being too much grip, but I haven't seen that.
And for those of you listening, concave is a type of stock where it's if you think about the crease where the nails would be, this crease continues from heel to heel, goes all the way through the toes. So you've got that open space for grip. And the other thing I think is important is the inside web of that shoe has got a bevel to it. And that bevel allows every time that foot moves, all the dirt, footing, everything comes out. And so you have a fresh, unpacked foot hitting the ground, and that shoe's able to do what it's supposed to do.
Right. You get like that's concave, but you get that concavity, and it is like it evacuates the dirt every stride. And so then they're able to actually get in the ground and grab and go.
That's awesome.
So it's, and I'll even, on some shoes and stuff, if I have one for just different reasons, but you can put that inner web into some of them where you can leave the toe, just regular flat stock. And you could even, have a 3/4 fuller, which would be fuller down each branch. And then you could cut out that inside.
Right.
And that could give them a little bit of help too there.
So if they don't need as much traction as, say, a concave, they don't need that extra rim.
Yeah.
They just need that inside where it cleans out better. You're saying cut that out and build that bevel into that shoe.
Exactly. Yep.
That's a really good point because, when we talked a little bit about footing, I think that's really important. What kind of ground are these horses working in? And I agree with you. You hear people talk about too much traction on the back end. I don't think that exists.
I agree.
That foot doesn't slide as much. We need it to get into the ground. We need to be able to push and drive, and that's how we build that stability. And we're not. The way I think about it is if you've got a sprinter, or let's say you've got a guy going to steal second base.
Okay.
If you put cleats on him, he is 100 times faster because every stride grabs the ground and propels him forward. There's no slip backwards.
Yeah.
And I think that's really critical, especially on these big warm bloods that are so strong behind. They need to be able to push and they need to be able to drive.
Right. And it's, and especially when you're talking about these upper level stuff, when these guys like in their upper level dressage and then these big hunters and big jumpers, like they need to be able to grab the ground back there. And I think it can even go as far as if they can't, one, they're going to have issues, but they could start losing confidence. They should start, not wanting to jump, not wanting to do their work. I mean, because they feel slipping behind. They're not going to feel like they can do their job.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
So, I think it's crucial in a lot of ways.
So it goes back watching that horse work. If you can watch him under the saddle, you see those rooster tails coming up from the shoe, and you see them slipping. And one of the things I look at too is if they're slipping behind, you can watch that wear pattern on the front feet. Yeah. You get that real sharp roll right at the toe, not that even wear. You had that real sharp roll, and that's a clue to me. Like, hey, we're having to pull too much with this front end.
Exactly. My thought is they're not really designed to pull with their front feet.
Right.
It's not meant to do that. I mean, maybe some of these drafts and the big pulling stuff, they've at least been bred to be able to do that. But the horses we work on they're not meant to grab the ground with their front feet like that.
You're not going to win the hack if you're having to pull with the front end.
Grabbing around like a plow horse.
No. And dressage is out.
Yeah.
Like if you're having to grab with the front end, you're not able to function like you should.
No, not
You got to be able to push. You got to be able to drive.
Yeah, I agree. You got to have that engine where it can do its job, and those front feet got to be able to get out of the way.
Right. I've even seen it if I have horses foraging, like people say, "Oh, he's foraging." The first, everybody's like, "Oh, we need to speed the front end up," and I'm like, "No. I mean, we got a traction issue behind.
Yeah,
and we need more grip."
Yep, that's my first thought too. Is I'm thinking about traction behind and then maybe go towards the front. But that's my first thought too. And a lot of times that fixes it, or even one that's like tripping. If you have one that's kind of getting trippy up front for a lot of whatever reason, sometimes it's because they don't have any grip behind. Some of those horses that are barefoot behind, just shot up front, they start getting trippy. You put back shoes on them, and all of a sudden they're rocking.
That's awesome.
So and you don't do anything to the front end.
So one of the things you said, you're going to build them some concave.
Yeah.
That mean you're going to take some bar stock and turn them a shoe?
Yeah. 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 A lot of the time they do have some machine made shoes that I'll use now, but it doesn't beat a handmade concave.
So that's how crucial. How crucial do you think forging skills are to the farrier world? Like how because I mean there's so many keg shoes on the market and things like that. I mean I'm old school. Everybody knows that. I still love to build a shoe, but how critical do you think that is?
I think it's very critical. I think people, you can get away with doing less of it these days. And, and I'm guilty of it just as anybody. Like I use some pre-clip shoes and stuff like that. But I think when it comes down to it, if when it really bites you, say say it's late one night, you got a horse leaving for a show on, Friday morning, he sore, something happens, he needs a bar shoe. You don't have one. You got to build one.
Yep.
And being able to build one and have it where it fits that foot and go on, the horse is happy. You can't always do that. And so I think that's crucial. And then just the fact of when you learn to forge, you learn to use your anvil right, you learn to see feet better. When at least in mine, especially now, if I build a hind for a horse, like I can build a pair of shoes at home for a horse I shoe, and most of the time it about drops on the foot.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
You can put whatever shape you want into it rather than having to change a keg shoe. And I think that having to change the shape of a keg shoe, because most of the machine made shoes don't come with it's not the type of toe that I would put into it. And so then you've got to kind of completely change that thing. And that's a lot of work. A lot of guys don't want to do that. And so that's where I think it gets easier for some just to not fit the foot as well. But I think when you learn to forge, you learn to fit feet. And you learn where nail placement is crucial. You learn about proportions. You learn about offset your center mark a little bit. And, so I think there's a lot to learn just in the fact of learning to forge.
And I remember Jim Poor said this. Jim Poor's kind of a legend in the farrier world, but Jim Poor once said, if you can't build shoes, you can't know feet. And if you don't know feet, you can't build shoes.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that for probably the first 3 or 4 years. And I remember it was one of those 2:00 in the morning things where you wake up and you're like, I got it.
Yeah.
I understand it. So yeah, absolutely. Forging is, and like you talked about with the concave, I mean, it's only been the past few years that we've had a pre-made concave shoe. I mean, we were buying the stuff out of England in 6-foot sticks and
by a ton.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And you find out somebody's going to Florida for the winter, and it's like, hey, can you bring me back 200 sticks of concave?
Yep.
And we'd cut them, and I can tell you, there's nothing cooler than turning. I love concave.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so one thing about concave is it teaches you not to be slamming on steel real hard too, because you can mangle up a concave shoe pretty quick, and you can over flatten one pretty quick.
Right.
And it's not real forgiving, so it does.
No.
It's kind of like working aluminum, like it'll tell on you a bit, and so I like it a lot. And then it's quick too. I mean, I know you're a little better than me, but like 3 heat concave shoes are pretty common for some guys, and I need a few more heats, but
used to it was a 3 heat shoe for me. These days it's
maybe
closer to 4 or 5. I need that extra heat in there. I'm not quite as proficient.
Yeah, that's me.
And it's funny because you talk about that forging and keg shoes. I swear it's almost easier for me to build a handmade shoe now than it is to use a keg shoe, because I'm not shoeing as many horses as I used to, and I forget all the tricks to take the shape out of the keg shoe to make it what I want it to be.
Oh yeah.
And it's almost easier to just start with a flat piece of steel.
Yeah, and you can put your toe bend how you want it in there right from the start. Because you're right. I mean, a lot of these, especially hind shoes, man, they just have such a big wide toe in them. And then the quarters are wrong, and so you got to turn it into like a U-bolt, get your toe bend back, and then get your quarters around. And part of forging is it teaches you how to do that very easily. When you do that, you learn where the spots on the horn of the anvil are, so you can get that shoe put where you want it to be.
Because that is the issue with most keg shoes, is they don't look like feet.
No, I don't get that.
I don't either. Like.
I'm like, man, I just don't, you get this keg shoe and it's about a perfect circle, and I'm like, I don't have anything that would fit.
No.
I mean, I don't know that I've ever been able to drop a keg shoe on a foot and be like, there it is.
I've often wondered, like, what are the manufacturers trying to do here?
What's the model horse for
yes.
this? Like, I want to see this thing.
I guess it's the same horses that are in my textbook as a vet.
Yeah.
Because I never see those horses either. So I guess those horses are somewhere that the textbooks are written on, and shoemakers are making keg shoes. It's the same horse.
Yeah, it has to be. You know?
So, but no, I agree. Like, it's getting that fit right is so critical. So, well, if you had one thing you wish more people understood from a shoeing perspective, if you want to leave one message to our listeners out there, and we just scratched the surface today. I see a lot more episodes here because we got into, like, we just scratched the surface
I feel
of
like
shoeing.
we have to have one just on keratomas.
I mean, we could do a
us,
whole
we have
just
to
on
at some point.
keratomas. I mean, even something simple as pads. There's a whole episode just on pads.
Yes. And how I use less of them now.
Yes.
It's amazing. You suck less, you use less pads.
I agree 100%.
Yep.
It's amazing. When your technique's right, you need far less technology.
It's crazy. That's like, I remember when I got my trailer built and my stone wheel trailer built.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and it was years ago, but I was like, I want, 8 pad things for pads and all that stuff. Man, I don't use but like 3 of them now.
Right.
And it's crazy. And,
Yeah, when
you start treating feet better and you stop having to put so many pads on.
Yep.
So
So what's the one thing, if you could send any message out there to our listeners, what's the one thing you would tell them from a farrier's perspective? What's the one thing you'd love, if they take away anything from this podcast today, what would that be?
don't try and don't try and get your farrier to have a bunch of short feet on your horses. I think that's one thing. I think that if your farrier's talking about wanting depth and leaving a toe a little long, let them do it. You'll have a better foot later.
Build depth.
Yeah, build depth. Trust them, and you'll see. Like, it'll pay back.
Right.
Don't. It's not all about a short foot.
Well said. Well said. So one other cool thing I want to talk about with Kyle, you got an interesting hobby, don't you, Kyle?
Oh boy.
What do you like to do on the weekends?
I like to skydive.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I like to fly perfectly good airplanes.
Yeah, I like to jump out of them.
You like to jump out of them.
Yeah.
What?
I don't like landing in them.
Take off and cruise is fine, but that landing.
I don't want to land. I like landing under my parachute.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
It's fun. It's you got to start flying, and then I'll jump out with you flying.
That was my goal when I was learning to fly. My dad made a living as a pilot, and I never wanted to do that, but I always thought it'd be really cool to fly the skydive plane because the takeoff and landing is the fun part.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you could do that a lot as a skydive pilot.
Yeah. I mean, 10 times a day plus, and it's wild because like if you're the last one out of the plane, you go out and you'll see them like that big king air. They just, straight down.
I've heard that guy call, like I'm in the pattern, I'm coming into the airport and I'm getting close to the pattern. And when he calls skydivers away, I know like, hey, hold off because that last guy's out. It's going to be less than a minute and he's reporting he's on final. So don't get in the pattern.
Wild.
Just kind of fly, hold, stay away from the pattern. He's coming down. He's getting back on the ground quick.
Quick. I mean, he's beat me down to the ground several times.
Yes.
Like it's wild.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, Kyle, thanks for being here today. We really appreciate it. I hope y'all enjoyed that. Again, if y'all have got questions you want us to answer, if you've got more topics you want us to cover, and it can be anything, but especially on the foot, send us a message, an email, a DM, phone call. Still waiting on that letter for Dr. Caitlin. So if somebody can mail that letter, that would be awesome. Like I said, I got a bag of swag for you. So Kyle, thanks for being here.
Oh yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. And y'all, we'll look forward to seeing y'all next time. Thanks.